everyone. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the co-founder and CEO with Impetus Digital. At Impetus Digital, we have built some of the best-in-class asynchronous and synchronous virtual collaboration and communication tools. We have worked with life science companies from across the globe over the past 14 years to help them with everything from virtual advisory boards, online medical education, virtual ambassador programs at conferences, and everything in between. The most important thing here really is about a series of touch points with payers, allied healthcare providers, physicians, using a series of asynchronous and synchronous touch points. We have some of the best-in-class tools on our asynchronous platform, and we bundle that with our white glove service. But more importantly at Impetus, we really believe that everything starts with a conversation. And with some of these big, hairy, audacious conversations with some of the leading edge thinkers, the digital provocateurs, and the healthcare thought leaders, is we can all work together to collectively and positively disrupt healthcare. So I'm super excited about having one of these healthcare thought leaders with me at the table today. This is actually Dr. Luca Dezzani. He's actually a physician with extensive healthcare experience in clinical practice as well as in the pharmaceutical industry. He has practiced as a physician in both the hematology and oncology spaces, as well as in internal medicine before he joined US Oncology. He actually has served there in a series of different roles, including at a national, regional, as well as at global levels, both in Europe as well as in North America. Luca continued his career serving in executive roles across both, medical affairs. He went in clinical development, business development, and also with another company called ASI, as well as AstraZeneca. Luca is now the Vice President of US Oncology Medical Affairs at Johnson & Johnson. Welcome, Luca. So happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Natalie.
Absolutely. An exciting career, lots of really fascinating companies that are doing amazing things for patients. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are listening who would love to hear a little bit more about your story. You went from being a successful and important practicing physician and then decided to join Novartis as an oncology medical advisor. Tell us a little bit about some of your past roles and how you landed to where you are today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think one of my biggest passion throughout my entire career has always been and was back in the days when I was still practicing as a physician, clinical research. So I've always been passionate about running studies and partnering with different sponsors, including obviously pharmaceutical companies on clinical trials and clinical research. So back in the days when, again, I was still taking care of patients directly, I was really spending quite a bit of time, actually almost 50% of my time doing research, clinical research. Therefore, I had a nice understanding, I would say, and exposure to pharmaceutical companies, the work they are doing to help patients on the other side. So that's how kind of the curiosity came about, and obviously I had a few connections, and I knew people in the pharmaceutical industry. So I started to investigate and learn more about what a physician had to offer to a big pharmaceutical company, and the rest is history. I was very happy to make my first step into the pharmaceutical world with Novartis, and that's what was really the beginning of an amazing journey. I need to say, I didn't know everything about pharma back then, so obviously it was also a discovery journey for me. But the more I was learning about the impact I could make in my day-to-day work within the pharma world, the more I was loving it, and the more I was realizing I made the right decision in the first place.
Absolutely. So many exciting things to look at and turn over and investigate. So I have a lot of great questions to ask for you. So it's really interesting that you had started in pharma with a curiosity, with a penchant for clinical trials and wanting to make sure that the best of medicines could get to patients. And so that was already intrinsic in what your enjoyment is as being a physician. Now, we have also seen over the years changes in the pharmaceutical industry, probably from back in the day when you joined, including an evolution of how pharma has been, there's been like a transformation agenda, getting away from just the marketing and sales of medicines into much more complex medicines and needing to really escalate and elevate the level and the focus on medical affairs. Can you actually speak a little bit about how you have seen the evolution of pharma from the typical sales and marketing business model to something that's much more clinical and medically oriented with the uprising of the medical affairs department?
Yeah, absolutely. And I can tell you, in the last 20 years, even within medical affairs, we have seen a tremendous transformation, and I'll be happy to speak about it in a moment. But let me start by truly addressing your question, which is around the role and the focus that pharma, or the transformation of the focus that pharma has had over the last 2 decades. I remember when I first joined the industry, the approach was very much HCP centric. So efforts, resources, educational efforts were very much geared towards addressing HCP needs. And that was the big chunk of the work we were doing across the entire spectrum, right? But HCPs and providers were probably the biggest focus of our attention. We had a transition to where we are now, which is a much more holistic. And I think what we are trying to do now is to very much engage and address the needs across the entire healthcare ecosystems, whether it's HCP and providers, obviously still a major player in this environment, but also payers, policymakers, obviously patients, right? So now I would say the focus has shifted from being very much, as I said, HCP centric to be more holistic and geared towards the entire healthcare ecosystem. If I can make a prediction for the next decade, I think we're going to be going even more patient-centric. So I really think the future is patient centricity. Not that we are not going to be working with the other stakeholders in the healthcare environment, but I think we're going to be seeing more and more attention and more focus on the patient journey, the patient experience, what patient really needs and wants, and how we as a pharmaceutical organization can truly address those needs. So that's my prediction for the future.
And then what have you seen in terms of the evolution or the emergence, if you will, of the medical affairs department as we see it today?
Yeah, so medical affairs started as a very operational, I would say, arm, scientific arm of the pharmaceutical company, with a very clear mandate to provide high level, highly scientific medical education to key opinion leaders and HCPs in general. So it used to be very much legs on the ground, MSLs going out and engaging and educating people, obviously HCPs in general, that were using our products, right? So that was where medical affairs started, 20 or 25 years ago. Obviously, a lot has changed, and there are many other areas that have and are now part of the responsibilities of a medical affairs organization, whether it's data generation, the whole chapter of real world evidence, and doing studies to continue to provide evidence beyond the registration of that particular medicine. And then we have the whole work that we have been doing with patient advocacy groups and also helping that component, again, in the spirit of patient centricity. We have been doing more and more scientific communication and working with medical societies to continue that partnership with the objective of providing medical education to their members. And in other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is there has been a major evolution of the core responsibilities of medical affairs. I would say an expansion, a broadening of the responsibilities of medical affairs from pure medical education and engagement to also data generation, data dissemination, data amplification, and really working with all these other stakeholders in building those partnerships across the entire ecosystem.
Well, really well put. And we have definitely seen that the growth, if you will, in comparison to typically marketing sales being the biggest arm, if you will, of pharma, and really seeing this, like you said, the transformation, emergence, the expansion, if you will, of medical affairs in general, and really what their mandate and scope is. So what's also really interesting here is we have seen an evolution of how pharma's business model has changed, really going from a place of focus on these big blockbuster products, big cardiovascular, large sales forces, and all these sorts of things, getting to a place, a little bit of a commodity market, a lot of Me Too's, biologics, subsequent entry biologics, a lot of copycats, et cetera, and the commoditization of the marketplace. And so it's been making it very difficult for companies to continue with that mindset of the blockbuster. Hence, if you will, the emergence of the specialty medicine idea with the focus on things like rare disorders, oncologics, et cetera. Tell us a little bit about what you have seen in that transcendence and that change of the business model with pharma.
Yeah, I think the driver obviously is trying to address the biggest unmet medical needs. And the idea is an area like oncology, obviously that's my area of expertise, is an area that has, unfortunately, as we speak, still extremely high unmet medical need. And that's where definitely pharmaceutical companies have been trying to go with their research, because of course the idea is, we really want to try to help patients wherever the greatest needs are. I can tell you, and this is very much core to the work we are doing at Janssen. Now I think we're trying to make one step further, which is not only, to your point, moving away from that idea of like one size fits all kind of therapeutics, but really trying to embrace precision medicine and trying to design our clinical trials in a way that we will be able to tell at the end of the study who are the patients that will benefit the most with that particular medicine or with that particular therapeutic, whether it's through assessing a certain biomarker or anything, right, that will help us to not only understand and make sure that that particular medicine is helping patients with that particular, let's say, type of cancer in my case, but also like the subset and the specifics, the particular biological setting that that particular tumor has, so that our medicines are even more targeted towards that particular target or biomarker. So again, that's been the evolution, to your point, from like the one size fits all kind of approach many years ago, to narrow it down to disease areas where the unmet need is the highest, and now trying to go even deeper into truly understanding the biology of each particular, again, in my case, tumor type, so that we can really address the particular needs of that population that carries that particular mutation or particular biomarker.
So Luca, you bring up a lot of really interesting points in very much the complexity of the science and the technologies in developing these specialty medicines, immunotherapeutics, targeted biologics, small molecules, and the list goes on. And intrinsic in this are difficult things to understand and to create around CRISPR and genetic, creation of products. And there's a lot of people and complexity, et cetera, involved in it. Now, one of the things that's also really difficult, it depends on what side of this you look at, is healthcare is highly disruptible right now, meaning it's ready for some transformative change. The problem right now is that the speed of innovation is outpacing, if you will, the adoption rate in healthcare, but more specifically in pharma. So in some ways, we're going at the speed of a rocket in the innovation, and pharma is moving a little bit at a snail's pace. So some legacy frameworks around regulatory approvals, the appreciation of these expensive products with some of the older version of reimbursement models. How is pharma dealing with these real complexities and this disparity in speeds of adoption?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and everything you said is what we've been experiencing. I think in particular the extremely rapid evolution of science, that's amazing, obviously, and it's obviously what we want to see. At the same time, to your point, we also need the right infrastructure, right? We need everything around it to make sure the adoption, to your point, is as fast as the science that is driving new medicines being developed. The good news is that technology has been very much helping in that journey. If you think of things like data and analytics, the idea that, and I mentioned real world evidence before, the idea that we can now leverage the immense amount of data that healthcare data that are being generated every day, even in clinical practice, to continue to reinforce the clinical evidences that are generated in the setting of randomized clinical trials. To my mind, it's really the future, and to my mind is where we should be going. Really trying to work towards a kind of a convergence between what's happening in randomized clinical trials that lead to registration of new drugs and what's actually happening in the real world. And that's where, in medical affairs, we are truly trying to move the needle for patients. What we are trying to do is to tap into the wealth of data, healthcare data that we now have, and there are amazing databases in oncology that we can leverage. There are partnerships with institutions and networks that have amazing data sets, and that's what we are trying to do by bringing the right analytical power, by bringing the right methodology, and also partnering with regulators. I think it's now becoming more and more understood and known that regulators are also looking into real-world evidence as an amazing opportunity for the entire industry. And there are now guidelines that regulators like the FDA have been trying to implement. Because again, I think it's an amazing opportunity. I think it used to be a completely untapped opportunity. I think now we are definitely moving in the right direction, and probably only scratching the surface of the kind of full potential. But again, that's what we are working towards.
Yeah, it's so amazing that you touched on these amazing oncology data lakes that exist out there. And I'm going to want to come back to that because I think it's an essential part of this conversation. But I just want to double back a little bit on talking about something that really changed the trajectory of the world that we live in today, and that is COVID. And really in how it has accelerated a lot of things, but also decelerated some of the older things that probably would have gone obsolete over time. And so one of them has to do with the impact it had on clinical trials. There was almost like a moratorium until people recalibrated and reset and determine in some capacities change in clinical trial protocols to clinical endpoints in the trials, and even in some of the patient-reported outcomes and how that was being done. Tell us a little bit about the clinical trials that you were seeing, some of the fast changes that were made and what you see as being the future of clinical trials as a result of COVID-19.
Yeah, I need to say the changes in healthcare that COVID, to your point, and using kind of your words, has accelerated are probably way beyond just the clinical trial setting. I think we have seen changes across not only the industry, but really across the entire way patients are being treated in clinical practice, but also in the way science is being disseminated. Just think about the novel ways medical societies have been, and the innovative formats that medical societies have came up with to continue to play that role as educators in the scientific community, despite the lack of in-person meetings. But specifically to your point on clinical trials, I think we were already, before COVID, exploring things like decentralized clinical trials, or in general, ways of making clinical trial participation more patient-friendly, right? The idea that patients don't necessarily have to travel long distances every single time they have one of those milestones within the conduction of a clinical trial. There is much that can be done remotely now that we do have the technology in place. Hence, to your point, the acceleration of things like decentralized clinical trials that I think are here to stay. Actually, if anything, we're going to see more and more adoption of things like decentralized clinical trials. But again, I think the idea and the benefits can go way beyond decentralized clinical trials, probably, and that's why I think the benefits can be huge for real-world evidence, because I totally believe that new technologies like blockchain and some of the technologies we are now only starting to explore truly have the potential to transform the way we do clinical research, the way we do real-world evidence, and again, back in the spirit of patient centricity, really empower patients to not only own their clinical records and their clinical data and be part of the decision-making when it comes to their care, but also to really contribute to research by working with different sponsors and whoever is investigating their particular disease or their particular condition, but again, making the entire process very much patient-centric and really making sure that patients are the real decision maker and are in the driving seat when it comes to clinical research. So to me, the idea is that technology is now available. It's really up to us as an industry and as an ecosystem overall to leverage that technology and make it happen.
So well said, very, very much. We are going to come back to data lakes, but part of that is the real emphasis on data analytics and then the insights retrieved to be able to make real world decisions and to make fast, quick, nimble, strategic decisions and tactical on the brand and various levels. And one of this was really important, was really the continuous engagement of key customers and healthcare stakeholders. Traditionally, we've all done this in what I call in real life, or IRL. We're all used to that. That's what we've been doing. Then, of course, COVID changed all that. It changed the dynamics of the sales, MSL, physician engagement. And then we started talking a lot about things like omni-channel and looking for various ways and methodologies. You know, telemedicine came in with a physician-patient relationship, but then the pharma-physician or healthcare stakeholder relationship changed a lot. So there was a lot of use of various online channels to be able to extract insights for pharma to continue to be really successful with their strategic decisions. Tell us a little bit about how pharma companies maneuvered in this time and what the future is going to look like around in real life versus hybrid versus all virtual.
Yeah. So I think there have been several technologies and several platforms that used to be important already, probably before the pandemic, that all of a sudden became more important, and to a certain extent now probably mainstream. I mentioned earlier medical conferences and the work that medical societies have been doing behind the scenes to continue to play their role. I mean, that's been a major adjustment, right? If you think about it, the way we used to speak science and disseminate science and was at large medical conferences that were happening in person, and all the, not only the data presentations were happening in person, but also the entire scientific discourse and discussions and digestion of the data was actually happening at the conference center, maybe before or after the session. So there was a lot of science that was happening, and partnerships and conversations and study design and activities that were happening in person at, you know, medical conferences. And then all of a sudden, all those medical conferences went virtual, and we had to not only adjust to a virtual way of presenting new data, but also making sure that there was still the opportunity to pressure test and discuss data and come up with new ideas, and the whole kind of serendipity that happens when you are in a conference center. And I need to say, things like social media, for instance, Twitter probably in particular when it comes to science, really took a major role when it comes to ensuring that still thought leaders in the space and different players in the space were able not only to amplify the data releases that were happening at major conferences, but also try to have an offline conversation, right? An offline discussion on the data that was happening, and it's still happening on Twitter. All of that, again, it's here to stay. And again, if anything, will continue to grow. You asked me about how we in pharma, and obviously I can speak to medical affairs, have been trying to play into this entire kind of evolving world. And things like doing social listening. When I say social listening, I mean in a structured and methodical way, reading and try to get insights from social media and the conversations that are happening on Twitter, let's say, and try to digest and elaborate that data so that we could make actions so that we can inform our strategy. So the entire social listening field is something that probably we were starting of thinking of doing pre-pandemic, and it's now very much of a mainstream activity that we must do if we want to stay on top of what's happening out there, and if we want to real time, which is the beauty of it, real time know what's the reaction to data that either we present or competition present or is being presented at conferences or released to the public domain. So again, this is just an example, but it's I think a very powerful one of a technology that we were really not leveraging to the extent we are doing now, and we can probably continue to develop in the years to come.
Certainly a contribution, Luca, to that data lake that you were talking about, oncology and otherwise. And I think that as you were mentioning, more and more data are getting put into these. It almost feels like a data ocean now. And the real secret is going to be in the manufacturing or the refining, just like a refining of oil, so that there's actually some extraction or some accretion of value that comes from that. There's the big difference between information and insights. So there's information coming from, I guess, patient fitness apps and all kinds of applications that exist. Some of them are interoperable, others are not. Electronic health records, data coming from clinical trials and a myriad of other places. And they're all getting put into one place. Now, there's lots of interesting things happening from these data lakes, everything from new clinical trial development for creative development of, designing new chemical entities to developing software as a medical device. Just curious from your perspective of how you see pharma partnering, leveraging, simulating, designing, and utilizing all of this raw information into something that makes some semblance of sense to be able to create and manage and maintain and sustain this innovation agenda.
Yeah, so there are, obviously that's a big theme right now, and there are four big buckets, I would say, or challenges or opportunities, if we see it on the positive side, that we are trying to address when it comes to big data. The first challenge or opportunity is quality, right? So of course, there is a wealth of data. To your point, data that is being generated at a record time now, with wearables and in general, just the availability of data is only been growing. The problem is that in order to do good science and robust science, you need to be sure that the quality of that data that you are starting from is robust enough for the particular goal you have in mind, whether it's a registration for a new or publication, or just informing practice, right? Depending on the goal you have, you need to have more robust data from the get-go. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out, right? So quality is the big, first important step that you need to ensure and address when you are starting to look into big data. The second one is the analytical power, right? So the second one is, okay, I have this massive volume of data. How do I find the pattern? How do I read and do it manually? It's becoming almost impossible, right? So that's how artificial intelligence is coming into play. We are leveraging more and more artificial intelligence to do what artificial intelligence is good at, which is finding patterns, finding trends in large volume of data, right? And that's work that, if done manually, would take forever. Computers can do it very efficiently and very quickly. So that's the second piece. And I think also on this one, I think we have a good solution for. The third one is, to your point, transformation. Once you have those patterns, once you understand the data, then you need to create those insights, right? Then you have to understand how I'm going to translate this insights I get into an action, right? How am I going to translate this into a new trial? How am I going to translate this into a new something, right? So that's the third bucket, really like the translating data, translating raw data into something that is actually actionable, right? Coming to your point, the process of transforming information into insights. And that's work that most of the time it's still done manually, right? I think artificial intelligence can really help to put order into data, can help to find those patterns, can help to find those trends, but then the actual translation of the data into strategy, that's something that still we very much do manually. And then the last piece, the fourth step is how do I actually create some sort of a feedback loop, right? So how do I close the circle? Once I have the data, I know how to process the data, I know what the data means, and I take action on that data. How do I make sure that I do have a feedback loop so that the data quality improves, so that the data source continuously improve, and I have a virtuous cycle that keeps going and keeps improving the process as we move forward. So I think these are the kind of four things that are top of mind right now when it comes to data lakes and big data in general. But again, the good news is that for each one of these buckets, we do have solutions in place. Again, there is always room for improvement, but I really think this is going to be another area of tremendous transformations in the couple of years to come.
Wow, very, very exciting and so well explained. You have also really emphasized today the focus on patient centricity. And you believe that this is really going to be the future of everything from clinical trials to how protocols are developed, to how products are basically developed and sustained and built, et cetera. I'm just curious about the world that we live in and the true inclusion and the immense amount of diversity, underrepresented societies, everything from digital opinion leaders to basically underrepresented societies, the unequal or the unequitable access to everything from Wi-Fi to global drug launches and access to medicines, et cetera. How do you see pharma helping to solve this very complex issue with like innovative systems thinking to try to start solving these multitude of problems to ensure diversity, inclusion, and equity, and involvement of patients, even if it's something as simple as infrastructure and getting access to Wi-Fi? What are some of the things we could start doing?
Yeah. So again, I think the good news is that, for many of these challenges, quite frankly, the technology is available today. It's just a matter of truly leveraging the different technologies that are required to overcome some of the very good kind of needs and gaps you have, or challenges you have highlighted. So again, the reason why I keep emphasizing that patient centricity is the key to unlock a future with more inclusion, with more access to care, with more equity, it's because I think that by empowering patients to own their healthcare records, we're going to be able to empower them to participate in trials. We're going to be able to empower patients to take a more active role in defining their care along with their doctors. So the idea that there are now more and more players and companies out there that are trying to empower patients and enable patients to have one single source of truth for their personal healthcare data, and they can use that data as they think they want to use them. If they want to change doctor, it's easy for them to take their healthcare data along with them and go to a different doctor. If they need a specialist, if they need, if they want to participate in a clinical trial, they just have access to their healthcare record, and they can share data as they think they see the best fit and the best need for in their best interest at the end of the day. And that's why I also see patient advocacy groups playing even more important role as we move forward, because that's how even like small minorities can join forces and say, okay, there is a lack of data on my particular ethnic group in liver cancer. I'm just making it up. So why don't we join forces as a patient advocacy group with liver cancer? And why don't we, as a collective group, partner with this particular principal investigator, or this particular company that is thinking of doing a study on my particular condition and on my particular ethnic group? So that's the opportunity that something like, again, blockchain technology may offer in the years to come to patients that can, as I said, take a more active role when it comes to their care or their participation into research trials. So again, but again, none of this is going to be possible if we are not going to empower patients, and we're not going to give full access to patients to their, and ownership to patients of their healthcare data.
Yeah, really lots to think about there. But I think a very hopeful message and a message of promise and opportunity, also to uncover all kinds of other potential partnerships with electronic software companies. I think it's going to look very different. And I'm sure a conversation with you in another 10 years is going to have a very different tone and content. So that will be of a lot of interest. I think this will be the end of our conversation. For anybody who's interested in contacting Luca for a series of, partnerships, conversation, learning more about what Janssen is doing in oncology, please look for his contact details in the show notes below. If you also enjoy this show, check out impetusdigital.com. These are the kinds of unique conversations we have with physicians, payers, allied healthcare providers, patients, with pharma companies in a series of synchronous and asynchronous touch points to help solve complex and tough problems, for help brand strategy and tactical execution, and helping brands figure out what they're going to be doing in the future. So please like and subscribe to our channel. We'd really appreciate it if you can also leave some feedback on iTunes. We want to thank everybody for their time today. And thank you, Luca, for a wonderful conversation.